Wavesound presents an unabridged recording of What's Wrong With You by Dr. Sarah Holper, narrated by Rupert Degas. Introduction. I've learnt odd things working as a doctor. Interest in discussing bowel motions increases proportionally with age. Heavily tattooed people tend to be needle-phobic. The phrase testicular trauma will reliably cause a man to cross his legs. Then there are the procedural skills. I've learnt how to suture eyebrows back together, drill holes in skulls, and remove appendices and skin cancers. I once even learnt how to extract a receipt spike from a barista's forearm. Above all, I've learnt that everyone is fascinated by their body, what comes out of it, what can go wrong with it, and why people have the symptoms they do. Everybody has a body, and everybody gets sick. But unless you go to medical school, you're never taught how to interpret common symptoms. Why do teenagers and bodybuilders get acne? Why do you feel like yawning when you're tired, nervous, or when you think about yawning, like now? Why do most men go bald, but women and castrated men don't? Patients are often self-conscious about their lack of medical knowledge. I'm always quick to provide reassurance. Why should you be expected to understand how your body works just because you have one? I have a microwave. From my perspective, it works via push-button magic. Similarly, I'm not embarrassed that I can't speak Portuguese, because I've never been taught it. Some patients pretend to understand medical lingo to not look stupid. Others fester with anxiety and defer medical attention because they misinterpret their symptoms as harbingers of some terminal disease, invariably cancer or a rare tropical infection. Doctors have an unfair monopoly on body-based knowledge. Historically, we learnt anatomy by dissecting the grave-robbed corpses of criminals. Nowadays, we attend medical schools where it takes us years to learn the science of how the body functions. When we graduate, many of us forget that the intricacies of human anatomy and physiology aren't common knowledge. Doctors think in terms of diagnoses, catch-all Latin labels that neatly account for the patient's symptoms. But patients, i.e. normal people, don't care about these impenetrable terms we commonly use, like myocardial infraction, transient ischemic attack, or facio-scapulohumeral muscular dystrophy. Well, we don't commonly use that one. Most patients just want doctors to explain what's going on inside them that's causing them to feel sick. Being armed with knowledge is not only fascinating, but it helps psychologically in the recovery process. Thankfully, medicine is rapidly shifting from the paternalistic model of the doctor knows best. Hurried assurances that your symptoms are normal or nothing to worry about are unacceptable. You have the right to understand what's going wrong with you when you feel unwell. It's your body, for goodness sake. Health misconceptions plague people from all social classes, postcodes, and levels of education. Shonky advice from celebrities, personal trainers, and social media is taken as gospel. You wouldn't need an actor's advice to fix your loose tap, nor should you heed their advice to fix your loose bowels. 1 in every 15 Google searches is health-related. That's over 1 billion Dr. Google consultations per day. It would be better if you got the facts from a more trustworthy source, ideally one whose responses aren't influenced by an algorithm tracking your eBay purchases. What's Wrong With You contains plenty of those facts, plus the juicy bits from medical school and my life as a doctor, minus unpaid overtime and the smell of embalming fluid. It's packed with hospital anecdotes, cultural diversions, and historical oddities. If you've ever wondered why you're dizzy, burpy, baldy, chesty, deafy, or sniffy, all of which, incidentally, were brainstormed dwarf names that Walt Disney rejected for his 1937 classic Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, then What's Wrong With You is for you. Dr. Sarah Holper. Headache. The brain is the only organ that named itself. Mull over that for too long, and a headache may result. Of the skills required by a banjo player, excellent fine motor control is perhaps the most important. An ability to tolerate widespread contempt for your craft is another. In the early 2000s, legendary American banjoist Eddie Adcock began to struggle with a tremor in his plucking hand, an ailment known as essential tremor. No medication could control the potentially career-ending shaking in his right hand. It was probably the most devastating thing I've ever faced in my life, Adcock admitted. In 2008, at the age of 70, Adcock opted to undergo deep brain stimulation in an attempt to terminate the tremor. The surgeon, Dr. Joseph Nymat at Tennessee's Vanderbilt University Medical Center, drilled a hole in Adcock's skull, then skewered the exposed brain with a metal electrode. He pushed it through Adcock's brain until its tip was sitting in the thalamus, the faulty tremor-triggering region. The surgical team hoped to scramble the thalamus's tremor signal by passing an electric current through the tip of the electrode. Banjo in hand, Adcock remained conscious during the 3.5-hour procedure, treating the surgical team to, or, depending on your view of bluegrass music, subjecting them to, a private banjo concert. Adcock provided feedback on his strumming control as the surgeon adjusted the electrode's depth and level of stimulation. After meticulous millimeter and millivolt adjustments, Adcock's tremulous plucking became perfect. "I knew when the surgeon had the sweet spot, and that was it," he reported. While the delicate procedure was painstaking for the surgeon, it certainly wasn't painful for Adcock. If you cracked open your skull and jabbed your brain with a sharp stick, you'd feel nothing. Admittedly, slicing through your scalp and removing the bone would hurt a fair bit, but the actual brain prodding would be fine. Your brain can't feel pain. It receives all the information from pain sensors around your body, but has none of its own. Since slicing or impaling the brain is painless, procedures like the one that Adcock underwent can be performed with the patient awake. Keeping the patient conscious isn't just to save money on general anesthetic drugs. If the neurosurgeon strays into a critical region of the brain, a conscious patient can immediately make this clear by saying, "I can't move my left foot," or "my speech is slurry," for example. Live feedback allows the surgeon to avoid melon-balling out functional areas of the patient's brain. If the patient were asleep, the neurosurgeon would only discover that they'd accidentally damaged a critical brain structure when the patient awoke, paralyzed or mute in the recovery room. Some neurosurgeons prefer the asleep-awake-asleep strategy. The patient is initially rendered oblivious to the rather off-putting racket and vibration of skull drilling, is conscious during the brain fiddling, then anesthetized again when their scalp is stitched back together. The final asleep phase reduces patient anxiety, with the added benefit of allowing the surgeon to chit-chat uninhibitedly about their weekend plans. I jest, neurosurgeons rarely have weekends off, nor do they participate in chit-chat. Hold up 2 fists, as though you're about to throw a punch. Now put your fists together with the fingernails touching. That's the rough size and shape of your brain. A 1.4 kilogram wrinkly beige organ responsible for everything you've ever thought, said, or done. Being 75% water, your brain is surprisingly squishy, the consistency of soft tofu. A fresh brain placed on a bench is liable to deform and tear due solely to the effects of gravity. Thankfully, in vivo, your blobby brain is supported inside your skull by your triple-ply meninges. These 3 layers of membranous cling film contain a cushioning fluid layer that suspends your brain to maintain its shape. Each of the 3 meningeal layers has distinct characteristics. The delicate innermost meningeal layer, tenderly enveloping your brain's every wrinkle, is called your pia mater, Latin for loving mother. The second layer sticks to the pia mater via cobweb-like mesh, hence it's called the arachnoid mater, spider mother. A thin layer of fluid flows in the webby space between the pia mater and the arachnoid mater. The fluid, which looks indistinguishable from water, is called cerebrospinal fluid. Anchoring the arachnoid mater to the skull is the third and final layer, the fibrous dura mater, tough mother. The three layers of meninges can be thought of as akin to an orange, the fine membrane over each segment, the cobwebby pith, and the tough outer peel. The slightly creepy mother references come from a translation of a medical text written by the 10th century Persian physician Ali Abbas. At the time, Arabic doctors referred to the meninges as mothers because they believed that these protective wrappings were the source of, i.e. the mother of, all the membranes in the body. Since, as Eddie Adcock would attest, your brain is incapable of feeling, clearly the pain of a headache doesn't come from your brain. Alas, although the brain itself lacks pain receptors, the structures around it do not. Your dura mater, the muscles in your scalp, neck and face, your sinuses, eyes, teeth, ear canals, blood vessels throughout your head, and the inner bony surface of your skull are all pain-sensitive. Even if you are a tough mother, anything irritating, stretching, pulling on, pushing on, infecting, or otherwise damaging these structures can give you a headache. From a doctor's perspective, there are three sorts of headaches: deadly headaches, common bread-and-butter headaches, and rare and unusual headaches. Let's consider them each in turn. The deadly headaches. First, let's address the elephant in the room. Could your headache be a brain tumour? If you've just got a headache and no other symptoms, then it's unlikely. Usually, a brain tumour causes headache and other neurological problems like seizures, problems with thinking, gradual changes in behaviour or focal weakness. An isolated headache with no other symptoms is the presenting complaint in just 2 to 16% of adults with brain tumours. Brain tumours cause a headache due to pressure. Your skull is a rock-like shell with a fixed volume somewhere between 1400 and 1700 millilitres. Since your skull can't expand, if your brain increases in volume from anything, for example, a brain tumour, blood from a ruptured aneurysm or a pus-filled abscess, the pressure inside your skull will increase. Headache results from various pain-sensitive structures being squashed, such as the swollen part of your brain pressing on your dura mater. The pain is classically worse in the morning and is often so severe that it wakes the patient from sleep. The unsettling experience of random projectile vomiting without nausea can occur if the brainstem's vomiting centre becomes compressed. Extreme increases in pressure within the skull can be catastrophic. When there's no space left to expand, the brain will be left with no alternative but to extrude, like toothpaste, through the hole in the base of your skull where your spine usually emerges. Instantly lethal, this event is often referred to by the inappropriately cutesy term coning. Mountaineers will be familiar with warning signs on the ascent trail, urging climbers with a headache to turn back. For over 2,000 years, headache has tormented those with a craving for climbing. Headache was so familiar to Silk Road travellers during the Han Dynasty, 206 BC to 220 AD, that high-altitude stretches of the Central Asian track were dubbed Great Headache Mountain and Little Headache Mountain. Half of those who ascend over 3,000 metres will get a headache. Usually it's a dull, pressing pain at the front of the head, exacerbated by movement. As you ascend, every breath contains less oxygen. Blood flow to your brain must increase up to 25% to maintain normal oxygenation. Pressure builds within your skull from the extra blood volume, resulting in significant pain. Worse, the blood vessels become leaky, allowing fluid to leach into the brain itself. Your brain becomes bloated with fluid, a condition known as cerebral edema. With all these volume increases inside your skull, it's only a matter of time before you cone, unless you drown first from the same leaking phenomenon in the lungs called pulmonary edema. An aneurysm is an abnormal bulging or ballooning at a weak spot in an artery. Like party balloons, aneurysms have very thin walls, making them precariously liable to pop. If a brain aneurysm bursts, the sudden excruciating pain is dubbed a thunderclap headache. Intriguingly, the sensation is almost universally described as being whacked over the back of the head with a baseball bat, or a cricket bat in Australian hospitals. Rupture of a large aneurysm can cause catastrophic bleeding in the brain and death. During some stressful point in your life, a snooty bystander may have warned you that unless you calm down, you'll give yourself an aneurysm. Besides such a comment being intensely irritating, it's also medically inaccurate. It's not entirely clear why some people form aneurysms in the first place, but you certainly can't voluntarily give yourself an aneurysm by being stressed. A more precise warning would be, unless you calm down, your persistent high blood pressure could increase the risk of aneurysm formation, according to some studies. The common bread-and-butter headaches. Headaches are an almost universal human experience. Surveys show that 96% of people experience a headache at some point in their life. Almost 3 billion people had a tension-type headache or migraine in 2016, based on data from the Global Burden of Diseases study. The same research found tension-type headache to be the third most prevalent medical disorder in the world after tooth decay and dormant tuberculosis infection. Migraine came in 6th place. You know the feeling, that dull pressure squeezing both sides of your head like a vice. That's a tension-type headache. 80% of people experience them. We used to call them tension, stress, muscle contraction, or psychogenic headaches, because we thought the pain came from sustained neck muscle contractions induced by psychological stress. Further research disproving this theory caused debate among neurologists until everyone agreed to add the modifier type. The precise mechanisms behind tension-type headaches aren't clear. There might be overactive pain receptors around the head and neck, or heightened sensitivity to pain messages travelling through the spinal cord and brain. Whatever the cause, suggesting that a person with a tension-type headache just needs to relax is unhelpful and is likely to increase the tension. A migraine is not just a bad headache, it's a particular type of headache associated with symptoms of temporary brain malfunction. Pain is merely stage 3 of the 4-stage migraine process, which can span days. Not everyone who suffers migraine goes through all 4 phases. In fact, some people don't even experience the headache stage. Up to 3/4 of migraineurs experience warning symptoms a few days before the headache. Classic complaints include tiredness, poor concentration, irritability, and an inexplicable need to yawn and urinate. Weird food cravings are also common. One of my patients devoured anything with chicken flavouring. She found this troubling as she was vegan. Another patient's sugar cravings drove her to guzzle cordial neat from the bottle. All these symptoms arise from the hypothalamus, a deep brain structure responsible for regulating many basic bodily functions, including thirst, appetite, emotional responses, body temperature, and circadian rhythms. In the hour before the headache kicks in, 1/3 of migraineurs experience bizarre transient symptoms called an aura. Visual auras are the most common. Often it starts with a bright spot just off-center of your vision that slowly expands into a shimmering crescent. Geometric shapes and zigzags dance around the expanding edge. The zigzags are called fortification spectra because they resemble an aerial view of the complex moats and ramparts defending a medieval town. Slowly the crescent drifts into your peripheral vision, leaving a blind spot in its wake. Other non-visual auras include tingling that creeps along a limb, trouble finding words, or weakness down one half of the body. Auras are thought to be driven by a self-propagating wave of nerve firing rolling across the brain's surface. At the crest of the wave, nerves fire madly, making you hallucinate zigzagging lines. In its wake, exhausted nerves can't fire at all and may leave a residual blind spot. Using real-time imaging techniques on people experiencing an aura, researchers have clocked the wave rippling across the brain's surface at about 3 millimeters per minute. Next comes the headache. Throbbing, severe, and one-sided, the word migraine comes from the Greek for pain in one half of the head. Lights, sounds, and movement are agonizing. The sufferer often retreats to a dark room to sleep off the pain, which can last from 4 hours to 3 days if not treated. Many factors contribute to the pain of a migraine, including that nerve-firing wave passing over the brain's surface during the aura. In their firing frenzy, nerves spurt out a concoction of pain-causing chemicals which activate pain receptors in the meninges sitting just above them. The resultant inflammation and changes in blood flow perpetuate the pain. During the final recovery phase, the person is usually left drained and exhausted, though some people experience euphoria in excess of the simple joy that the pain has gone. We don't know why some people get migraines, but there's definitely a genetic component. Approximately 70% of migraineurs have a first-degree relative who also gets migraines, and your risk of migraine is quadrupled if you have a relative who suffers migraine with aura. For those who do experience migraines, certain activities can set them off. Most people would enjoy a lazy weekend away in a mountain cabin, indulging in red wine and a charcuterie board by an open fire while a thunderstorm rages outside. But to a migraineur, such a sojourn sounds nightmarish. All of those activities, sleeping in, high-altitude, alcohol, nitrates in meats and cheeses, smoke, storms, even weekends per se, are known migraine triggers. Other common migraine precipitants include menstruation, fasting, strong odors, and stress. I treated a patient who was rendered bedbound by a migraine for 2 days every time she ran into her ex-boyfriend. She eventually moved interstate, where she became ex-boyfriend and headache-free. Migraines afflict about 12% of the population. Curiously, when you narrow the population down to just neurologists, more than half are migraineurs. It could be that the 12% figure is falsely low. Many people endure their migraine symptoms and never receive an accurate diagnosis. Conversely, presumably neurologists, being brain specialists, more accurately self-identify their symptoms as a migraine, thus leading to those higher rates of diagnosis. Or perhaps junior doctors who suffer migraines are drawn to the specialty of neurology to understand their aching heads. Doctors joke that we tend to disproportionately suffer from diseases within our specialty. Cardiologists get heart attacks, oncologists get cancer, radiologists get CT scanners falling on them, so neurologists ought to get migraines. Or maybe neurologists' brains are just hurting from the constant metaphysical state of thinking about thinking. The rare and unusual headaches. At medical school we're taught that when you hear hoofbeats, think of horses, not zebras. Another similar aphorism is, common disorders occur commonly. Indeed, most headaches are horses, tension-type headaches and migraines, but occasionally those galloping hooves belong to rare and unusual headache zebras. I've herded them together here. Ice-pick headaches are characterized by intense, fleeting, stabbing pains felt around the head. Often these patients also experience other sorts of headaches like migraines. The ice pick tends to stab them where their other headaches are felt, suggesting that the pain might be due to twitchy, hypersensitive nerves randomly firing. A numismatist is a person who collects coins. A patient with a nummular headache has a coin-sized patch of scalp that constantly hurts. Usually there's just one sore spot, but a few patients with 2 aching coins have been reported. Hypnic headaches, also called alarm clock headaches, develop only during sleep and cause the patient to wake up. It's one of the few types of headache that occurs almost exclusively in older people, with a mean age of onset of around 60. Exercise headaches cause the whole head to throb, brought on by physical exertion, particularly in hot weather or at high altitude. Coital cephalgia is the charmingly euphemistic term for a headache triggered by sexual activity, either intercourse or masturbation. Neurologists divide the headaches into pre-orgasmic, a dull ache that grows more intense with increasing sexual arousal, and orgasmic, a thunderclap headache at the moment of orgasm. It's important to ensure that patients with the orgasmic subtype haven't actually burst an aneurysm in their brain. As you'll recall, aneurysm rupture also causes a thunderclap headache. Particularly worrying is the fact that up to 12% of patients presenting with a ruptured aneurysm report to their doctor, quite sheepishly in my experience, that the thunder clapped during sex. Patients with repeated attacks of coital cephalgia are advised to take an anti-inflammatory tablet 30 to 60 minutes before sex. While this rather removes the spontaneity of the event, it's preferable to being rushed to hospital after every orgasm to ensure that a blood vessel in your head hasn't exploded. The final rare and unusual headache, the cluster headache, is considered one of the most extraordinarily painful conditions a human can experience. The vicious pain has driven patients to suicide, hence their other name, suicide headaches. Thankfully, cluster headaches are rare, affecting about 1 in every 1,000 people, with men 5 times more likely to suffer from them than women. Cluster headaches get their name because they strike in bouts, searing attacks up to 8 times per day, typically for several weeks or months, separated by periods of remission lasting months or years. A particularly unfortunate 15% of sufferers experience unremitting bouts that can last years. Cluster headaches have an uncanny seasonal rhythmicity. Solstices and equinoxes are peak times. In recognition of the link, Cluster Headache Awareness Day is observed every year on the 21st of March, the date of the Northern Hemisphere's spring equinox, 23rd of September in the Southern Hemisphere. Cluster headaches don't just follow the calendar, they appear to have a watch. Attacks often occur at precisely the same time, to the minute, every day during a cluster. Nocturnal onset is common, turning many patients into insomniacs. The seasonal pattern and clock-like regularity of cluster headaches strongly implicate a malfunctioning body clock, the hypothalamus responsible for your circadian rhythm. We don't know why the hypothalamus goes so badly off script and triggers the searing pain, nor do we know why inhaled pure oxygen sometimes aborts the attack, hence the need for cluster headache awareness days to promote further research. Being stabbed in the eye with a red-hot poker is the curiously consistent description of a cluster headache. The pain is always just on one side of the head, around one eye. The eye starts watering and becomes bloodshot, the pupil shrinks, and the eyelid swells and droops. Snot starts streaming, but just from the nostril on the affected side of the head. Beads of sweat also form on that half of the face, which can also become flushed. These extra non-pain symptoms are due to misfiring of the automatic nervous system, responsible for your unconscious bodily functions, like how wide your pupils and blood vessels are. Restlessness and physical self-harm to the head are common. The attack lasts between 15 to 180 minutes before the pain and all the other symptoms abruptly disappear, until the next night. Patients suffer these repeated attacks for weeks or months at a time, robbed of sleep and living in fear of the next round of torture. Perhaps now you can understand that awful nickname, suicide headaches. Headaches, cluster headaches in particular, are more than just a pain in the head. They can cause significant invisible suffering. The suffering is palpable in this excerpt from one man's experience with cluster headaches, published as The Father in Extremis in the Oxford Handbook of Clinical Medicine. I am careful not to wake the children as I make my way down the stairs. If they were to witness my nightly cluster ritual, they would never see me the same way again. Their father, fearless protector, diligent provider, crawling about in tears, beating his head on the hardwood floor. The pain is so intense I want to scream, but I never do. I go down 3 flights of stairs where I can't be heard and drop to my knees. I place my hands on the back of my head and lock my fingers together. I bind my head between my arms and squeeze as hard as I can in an attempt to crush my skull. I begin to roll around, banging my head on the floor, pressing my left eye with the full force of my palm. I search for the phone that has always been my weapon of choice for creating a diversion, and I beat my left temple with the handpiece. I create a rhythm as I strike my skull, cursing the demon with each blow. Summary. Your brain can't feel pain. Headache pain originates in pain-sensitive structures around the brain, like blood vessels and the brain's protective lining. And also, an explosive headache caused by explosives. Working closely with explosives carries significant health risks, loss of limb, loss of life, and a pounding headache. Headaches have been observed among people handling explosives since the Boer War. Some munition workers called the throbbing pain bang head, while others went for powder head. Incidents peaked around the 2 world wars when production of explosives, pardon the pun, skyrocketed. The headache-causing compounds are the organic nitrates used to make gunpowder and explosives like nitroglycerin and TNT, trinitrotoluene. These nitrates can be absorbed through the skin and enter the bloodstream. The first published description of headaches among men handling nitrates appeared in a 1910 article titled Nitroglycerin Head. A man who is working in powder may cause another person a great deal of misery by simply shaking hands or by permitting articles which he has been using to be handled by the other. A worker frequently carries some of the drug to his home in his clothing and may make his whole family sick. Sleeping in the same bed or the wearing of contaminated clothing will likewise produce effects. Once in the bloodstream, nitrates convert to nitric oxide, which causes blood vessels all over the body to widen, including in the brain. Pressure rises within the skull due to the extra blood in the swollen blood vessels. Squashed pain-sensitive structures within the skull cause a severe throbbing headache. Any posture that causes blood to pool in the head due to gravity, like bending forward or lying down, causes a surge of pain. Mandatory use of protective clothing eventually led to a decline in bang head cases. These days, nitrates are prescribed as a medication. Lack of blood flow to the heart muscle can cause chest pain called angina. Taking nitrates, usually as a spray under the tongue, widens the blood vessels supplying the heart. With the extra blood comes extra oxygen, relieving the chest pain. As expected, headache is a common side effect. Hydration and headaches. Since your brain is 75% water, it's exquisitely sensitive to dehydration. Inadequate fluid intake or excessive fluid loss, like when you're hungover, can temporarily cause your brain to slightly shrivel. As your brain contracts from your skull, it tugs on the meninges, yanking on the pain-sensitive dura mater anchored to the bone. You experience this internal tug-of-war as a headache. But don't rehydrate on a mouthful of iced water too quickly, or else you're in for another sort of headache, sphenopalatine ganglioneuralgia, a brain freeze headache. When cold liquid gushes into your mouth, it rapidly cools the blood in the vessels in the roof of your mouth. The sudden drop in temperature causes the vessels to squeeze tight, then rapidly reopen. The rebound dilation triggers pain receptors in your head. Pressing your warm tongue to the roof of your mouth usually provides enough heat to swiftly relieve the pain. Jet lag and your body clock. Your feet may not have a sense of rhythm, but your brain certainly does. Jet lag is the bane of the modern traveller. But at least those seeking exotic lands no longer face scurvy, starvation, or a 90% mortality rate en route to their destination. These were the grim realities confronting the 270 sailors aboard the first fleet to circumnavigate the globe, captained by Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan. As the 5-ship fleet departed Spain in 1519, the crew had no idea that they were embarking on a 3-year voyage from hell. Mutiny broke out within months. Food shortages forced them to eat biscuit crumbs, writhing with worms and soaked in rat urine. Philippine warriors armed with bamboo spears and cutlasses gruesomely executed Magellan halfway through the expedition. Men died from murder, malnutrition, and being marooned. After more than 1,000 days at sea, just 18 dishevelled men aboard one ship, the Victoria, remained. Nearly home and in desperate need of supplies, they docked at Cape Verde, a Portuguese colony some 3,000 kilometres south of their homeland. Antonio Pigafetta, an Italian scholar on board the Victoria, recounted in his diary, "In order to see whether we had kept an exact account of the days, we charged those who went ashore to ask what day of the week it was, and they were told by the Portuguese inhabitants of the island that it was Thursday, which was a great cause of wondering to us, since with us it was only Wednesday. We could not persuade ourselves that we were mistaken, and I was more surprised than the others, since having always been in good health, I had every day without intermission written down the day that was current. But we were afterwards advised that there was no error on our part, since, as we had always sailed towards the west, following the course of the sun, and had returned to the same place, we must have gained 24 hours, as is clear to anyone who reflects upon it." Let's reflect upon it now. If you stand still on the earth, you'll see a sunrise every 24 hours. But if you're moving like Magellan's fleet, travelling westward following the sun, each sunrise will occur slightly more than 24 hours after the previous sunrise. Every day, as measured by the time between two sunrises, will be a bit longer than 24 hours. Over 3 years of sailing, those slight extensions added up to one whole missed sunrise, thus one whole missed day. Pigafetta's discrepancy of a day posed a problem. How could civilization keep accurate historical records, fulfill trade agreements, or reliably celebrate birthdays if the day and date could be changed by doing a lap of the globe? Sunrise counting was no longer a foolproof method of tracking days in this new era of global travel. We needed to arbitrarily decide on a demarcation where one calendar day became the next on our ever-spinning Earth. In 1884, astronomers and delegates from 25 countries met in Washington, D.C. to invent the International Date Line, an imaginary line extending between the North and the South Pole through the Pacific Ocean. The west side of the line is always 24 hours ahead of the east. It's Monday 9 a.m. on the left of the line, but Sunday 9 a.m. the moment you step to the right of the line, for example. Travellers crossing the line must set their calendar forwards or back a day to ensure that their diary matches the real global day and date. Thanks to the International Date Line, Pigafetta's diary dilemma is a thing of the past. One discomfort Magellan's crew avoided was that of jet lag. Jet lag is a consequence of rapid travel, moving across the Earth too quickly for your body's biological rhythms, like your sleep-wake cycle, to adjust to the changed light-dark cycle around you. Apart from the death rate, there was nothing rapid about the crew's 1,086-day voyage. As they inched west, the shifting sunrise time was so gradual that the men were oblivious to their lost day until it was pointed out. Fortunately, travel speeds have improved since the 16th century. Magellan would be gobsmacked if you told him that in 2017, Frenchman François Gabard sailed around the world in just short of 43 days. Solo. You could astound Magellan further by first explaining what a plane was, then, after ensuring he was sitting down, revealing that in 2005 one of these flying machines completed the first, non-stop, unrefueled lap of the world in just 67 hours, piloted solo by aviator Steve Fossett. Boggled by these bombshells, Magellan might experience mood swings, lose his appetite, and struggle to fall asleep. Ironically, he'd be suffering the symptoms of jet lag, a modern malady caused by high-speed air travel. Until the 20th century, humans had never travelled fast enough to necessitate a sudden body clock reset. Jet-propelled aircraft now allow us to crisscross the globe at a speed inconceivable to our ancestors. Our body clock is as unaccustomed to swiftly crossing time zones as Magellan would be to conceiving of a jet plane. Air travel opened a new chapter in human history. It also opened a new chapter in medical textbooks, a lengthy one on jet lag. The term jet lag seems to have first appeared in an article appearing in the Los Angeles Times on the 13th of February 1966. Journalist Horace Sutton suggested that if you're going to be a member of the jet set and fly off to Kathmandu for coffee with King Mahendra, you can count on contracting jet lag, a debility not unakin to a hangover. Jet lag derives from the simple fact that jets travel so fast they leave your body rhythms behind. By body rhythms, he means circadian rhythms. Sutton's unfamiliarity with the term circadian is understandable. The Romanian-American scientist Franz Halberg had only coined it in 1959. Halberg based the word circadian on the Latin words circa and diem, meaning about a day. His vagueness was deliberate. Circadian rhythms are patterns of biological activity that repeat about every 24 hours, every 24.2 hours on average, as we will soon learn. Your sleep-wake cycle is the most obvious example of a circadian rhythm. Every day, two hormones called melatonin and cortisol peak and trough to make you sleepy and alert at the appropriate times. Melatonin's soporific effects prepare your body for sleep. Melatonin is made and released by your pine cone-shaped pineal gland. Pinea is Latin for pine cone, a pine nut-sized structure perched atop your brainstem. Drowsiness sets in as your blood's melatonin concentration climbs through the evening, peaking at 3 a.m. At this point, cortisol levels begin to rise to prepare you for waking. Cortisol readies your body for exertion by boosting your blood pressure, heart rate, and blood sugar level. It's released by your two adrenal glands, fatty yellow structures resembling melted cheese draped over each kidney. By 9 a.m., your blood cortisol levels have reached their daily maximum. Most heart attacks happen between 6 a.m. and noon, partially due to the strain on the cardiovascular system from this morning cortisol surge. Body temperature, digestion, and the release of certain hormones also follow circadian rhythms. For example, you're hottest at 6 p.m. and coolest at 4 a.m. Intestinal squeezing and digestive juice squirting pause overnight. Instead, it's your brain's pituitary gland that's squirting out growth hormone, important for controlling your body's muscle and fat composition, and thyroid-releasing hormone, which regulates metabolism while you sleep. Much of our understanding of circadian rhythms comes from experiments conducted on humans in isolation. Without any external cues like clocks or daylight, what natural rhythms to their biological processes, if any, would emerge? In the 1960s, the German physician Jürgen Aschoff built an underground bunker to perform isolation experiments on volunteers. Recruitment was surprisingly straightforward, presumably because evil scientist with torture dungeon was yet to become established as a horror movie trope. One at a time, subjects would enter the bunker and live alone, without watches or natural sunlight, for 3 to 4 weeks. Aschoff asked his subjects to lead a regular life. They prepared food in the bunker's small kitchen when they felt peckish, they went to bed when they were tired, and woke when they felt refreshed. Aschoff wryly noted that many subjects were students who used the enforced solitude to cram for an examination. At one point, Aschoff locked himself in the bunker to try it out. After a great curiosity about true time during the first 2 days of bunker life, I lost all interest in this matter and felt perfectly comfortable to live timeless. Bedtimes, wake times, sleep duration, and the activity of each subject were documented. A rectal probe provided continuous body temperature readings. Urine volume and electrolyte concentrations were meticulously plotted. When Aschoff examined his data, a clear pattern emerged. The measured biological functions were repeating in cycles lasting about a day. They were circadian. Aschoff calculated the average circadian period to be 24.9 hours. Later experiments by other researchers with larger sample sizes revised the average to 24.2 hours. Aschoff's bunker experiments demonstrated that a human kept in isolation without any way of knowing the time will continue to alternate regularly between wakefulness and sleep, with other biological functions fluctuating rhythmically alongside. Pause for a moment and consider how remarkable this fact is. We live on a planet that happens to rotate at a speed that means the sun is overhead every 24 hours. By means of comparison, a day on Jupiter lasts about 10 hours, while a Venusian day drags on for 5,832 hours, or 243 Earth days. Somehow, even when you're locked in a bunker, which could be located on Jupiter for all you know, your body's functions will still insist on operating in cycles that are roughly 24 hours long. The Earth's speed of rotation is entrenched in your DNA. It's not some quirky cosmic coincidence. It's evolution. Animals need to do the right thing at the right time to survive. Prior to artificial lighting, human behavior was dictated by day and night. Survival depended on maximizing daytime productivity. Humans' feeble night vision and diminished hearing and sense of smell compared with other animals render us ill-equipped for nocturnal activities. Our ancestors who snoozed all day and stumbled about at night in search of berries did not enjoy a long lifespan. Through the process of natural selection, they developed circadian rhythms that sent them to bed at night for protection and woke them at dawn to resume fruitful activities. Their body rhythms evolved to match their home planet's 24-hour cycles of light and dark, since this gave them the best chance of survival. By developing self-sustained internal rhythms that are in sync with our environment, we can anticipate predictable changes in our environment and prepare in advance. For example, you don't have to wait for sunrise to trigger a cortisol surge. Its circadian release schedule has seen its levels rising since 3 a.m. to peak, as required at 9 a.m. Circadian rhythms orchestrated by your body clock allow your biological processes to be preemptive rather than passive. Messing with our circadian rhythms can have serious consequences. Humans have evolved to perform at our peak during the day and sleep at night.
If we're forced to perform cognitively taxing tasks when our body clock thinks it's night, due to jet lag or night shifts, for example, the results can be disastrous. Decision-making, emotional regulation, concentration, reaction times, and introspection are all impaired. Accidents and errors working with machines are more likely to happen overnight than during the day. The majority of single-vehicle driving accidents occur in the hours near dawn. Early morning has also historically been the peak time for human error catastrophes, such as the nuclear accidents at Chernobyl, 1:30 a.m., and 3 Mile Island, 4 a.m., and the Bhopal gas leak, 1 a.m. In the wake of Ashoff's bunker experiments, the hunt for the body clock, the part of the brain responsible for orchestrating our circadian rhythms, was on. One curious finding from Ashoff's research gave scientists a tantalizing tip-off about where to start their search. By fiddling with the bunker's light intensity, Ashoff found that he could prolong or contract a subject's circadian period. The body clock, it seemed, used light to wind its hands forwards or backwards. On this premise, body clock-seeking scientists homed in on areas of the brain around the optic nerves, the communication cables relaying light information from the back of each eye to the brain. In 1972, researchers inflicted brain damage on some unlucky rats and discovered that when they scrambled a part of the rat's hypothalami just above the optic nerves, their predictable daily pattern of drinking and wheel running was abolished. The researchers had successfully located and smashed the rats' body clocks. Indeed, the notion of a body clock isn't just a twee metaphor. It's a physical time-keeping structure in your brain that's as tangible as your wristwatch. Your body clock sits within your hypothalamus, a key brain region responsible for regulating many basic bodily functions, including thirst, appetite, and body temperature. The clock takes the form of 2 tiny clusters of nerves, each the size of a sesame seed. The seeds sit right at the front of your hypothalamus, poised over the point where your 2 optic nerves meet in a cross shape. All that geographical information is crammed into your body clock's name, the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Supra means above in Latin. Chiasm is Greek for cross-shaped, as in chi, the Greek letter X, and nucleus is Latin for kernel. To save time, ironically, medical types refer to the body clock as the SCN. Since the average circadian period is a bit over 24 hours, your SCN must routinely adjust its hands to maintain alignment with the 24-hour Earth day. It tweaks its settings based on environmental cues called Zeitgebers, German for time-givers, a term coined by Ashoff in 1960. Social interactions and meals are Zeitgebers. If you're chatting with mates over a burger, for example, your SCN infers it's not bedtime. But the most potent Zeitgeber, by a long shot, is light. Your SCN can't discriminate between sunlight and artificial lighting. If bright light is streaming into your eyes after sunset, your SCN deduces that it's still daytime and will prolong your circadian period. It will delay melatonin release, for example, and tell your intestines to keep squeezing. Conversely, if light floods your eyes before dawn, your SCN assumes that it's morning already and will wind its hands forwards. Cortisol levels will surge as your SCN hurries along your body's biological processes to catch up with the Earth's light and dark cycle. Unnatural light exposures, like watching TV just before bed or checking your phone in the middle of the night, can disrupt your circadian rhythms and cause sleep problems. Blind people can struggle to live in sync with Earth's 24-hour rotation. Their SCN has lost its most important Zeitgeber, environmental light data from their eyes. I once had a patient who was blinded after suffering severe facial burns. After the accident, he relied on speaking clocks, alarms, and his wife telling him it was bedtime to keep him on schedule. It wasn't enough. He'd lie in bed for hours, unable to sleep, as his stubborn SCN stuck to its unadjusted 24.2-ish hour circadian period. Eventually, taking melatonin tablets every evening allowed him to maintain an artificial sleep-wake pattern that matched the Earth's light-dark cycle. "West is best, east is a beast," is an oft-uttered aphorism of veteran jet-setters. They're right. Jet lag symptoms are often milder when travelling west compared to east. Flying west back in time requires you to prolong your circadian period to match the local clocks. Since the average circadian period is longer than 24 hours anyway, you've already got a head start. Unfortunately, that head start becomes a hindrance when travelling east, when you need to perform the usual slight truncation to 24 hours plus further shortening to align with local time. Strategically seeking and avoiding light exposure can help your SCN to reset faster. Altering your bedtime and wake time in the days leading up to a long-haul flight can ease the transition too. Jet lag symptoms, insomnia, daytime sleepiness, poor appetite, and moodiness occur because your bodily functions aren't happening at the appropriate time. Let's put the science into practice. Imagine you're flying west from Melbourne to Paris, heading 8 hours back in time. You disembark at 3 p.m. local time, but it's 11 p.m. according to your SCN, which has already coordinated your evening melatonin release and initiated intestinal shutdown. You join the locals in some afternoon tea, but as the crêpe au citron slips into your sleep-mode stomach, you immediately feel queasy. You retire to your hotel room, where the sleep pressure from melatonin becomes impossible to resist. Come 1 a.m., and you sit bolt upright, heart pounding, the result of your SCN's "It's 9 a.m. in Melbourne" cortisol peak. As you watch the sun eventually rise, not having slept another wink, you can barely speak English, let alone French. Your irritation is piqued by a baker snorting at your mispronounced request for a baguette, the zipper on your pants, which you don't feel like eating anyway. Summary: your body clock orchestrates your circadian rhythms, cycles of biological activity that repeat about every 24 hours to match the Earth's 24-hour light-dark cycle. Jet travel lets you cross time zones faster than your body clock can adjust. Until your body clock resyncs with local time, you'll suffer jet lag symptoms. And also, hamster brain surgery. If reincarnation existed, you wouldn't want to return as a research rodent. In 1987, scientists in Cincinnati, Ohio, poked electrified pins into the brains of some male golden hamsters to fizzle their SCNs. As expected, without a functional body clock, the hamsters' circadian behavioral patterns vanished. What would happen, the scientists wondered, if they transplanted working SCNs back into these hamsters? Would their circadian rhythms return? Alas, more bad news for research rodents. The scientists killed some pregnant hamsters and harvested the SCNs from their unborn babies' brains. Working rapidly, they injected the tiny, still-ticking body clocks into each male hamster's freshly fizzled brain. Post-op, astonishingly, the male hamsters returned to behavior that followed a circadian rhythm. The body clock, it turns out, is as transferable as a wristwatch. Waking up to reality. Sailors deployed aboard submarines say farewell to family, frolicking in open fields and natural light for months. Starting in the 1960s, naval commanders subverted this isolation to their advantage. There's no reason why submariners should follow a 24-hour day, they reasoned, besides the convention dictated by sunrise and sunset. Below the waves, days could be any duration the commander wanted. A hyper-productive 18-hour day was invented, 6 hours for work, 6 hours for meals and training drills, and the final 6 hours for sleep. Cutting on-duty shifts from 8 to 6 hours aimed to limit fatigue. If a sailor zoned out while manning the sub's nuclear reactors and missiles, the consequences could be catastrophic. The crew was divided in three, with a third of the crew being in any one block at any given time. In theory, the staggered schedules ensured a constant supply of wide-awake submariners to keep watch. Alas, the scheme, which looked flawless on paper, flopped in practice. The human circadian period is 24-ish hours. A bolshy Navy commander scrubbing 6 hours off the clock doesn't change that fact. Data from the U.S. Naval Submarine Medical Research Laboratory revealed that sailors consistently became fatigued every third cycle when they would be working during the hours that their SCN had scheduled for sleep. Admitting defeat in 2014, the Navy transitioned submariners back to a regular 24-hour day. A year after the change, Commander Tony Grayson reflected on the improvement. The crew are now able to establish and keep their circadian rhythm. Imagine how you feel when you fly on a long flight through several time zones. This jet lag is what we were asking our sailors to deal with every day by shifting their sleep 6 time zones to the east with each period on watch. That schedule affected the sailors because they would often end up being wide awake when it was time to sleep. Lieutenant Travis Nix attested to the vastly improved life aboard a 24-hour submarine. The officer of the deck is no longer leaning up against the stope with both eyes closed and being slapped by the junior officer of the deck to stay awake.